that first race when you ran against Walter Rand, and you didn't criticize him or take him in an ad hominem arguments or personal attacks, is that a bygone era, or is that something that you see now as something that we can expect again when civility returns to politics?
I don't know. I hope it's not a bygone era. I think for the time being, unfortunately, because I think redistricting, among other things, has created so many hard red districts and, frankly, hard blue districts, that there's a good deal of tension now and kind of tough feeling between the parties. And there are a few who are still kind of conservative Democrats and moderate Republicans that tend to be the leavening influence in the parties. And you see that with people who used to be more numerous than they are now, but can kind of see the other side and have an appeal to independents and to soft Republicans or soft Democrats, depending on their party. But unfortunately, they're both the sort of diminished groups in the Congress, which I think is unfortunate. We did have an interesting campaign. I really felt very warmly toward both Walt and Sally Horan, because when I was a staff member in Washington working for Scoop, they were both very kind to me. And, Walt had just been a very popular member, and Sally was probably the most skilled and in many ways congressional spouse I ever knew. She would walk ahead of Walt when they would be home in the district, and they would be going down the street in Spokane or Wenatchee or someplace, and Sally would say, "Walt, it's Bill Backamus." Why? It's Bill Backamus. Gretchen and Bill, their children are really growing up and so forth. And by the time Walt got up to see Bill Backamus, he would say, how's Gretchen? How are the children? And she would write like 200 letters or more a year to individuals in the district. And so when I ran, when somebody came up to me and said, look, you're going to be surprised by this, well, I'll tell you about it ahead of time. People who are precinct committeemen in the Democratic Party are not going to support you. They're going to support Walt, because they went back to Washington when Walt and Sally had been back there, and they took them to lunch in the House dining room and so forth. And it's true, it was true. But anyway, we had the campaign that was really, I think, so unusual in that sense that there was no kind of criticism. I said, I hope to be as good a congressman as Walt was. The times had come, there were new issues, and he said that when he left Congress, which was not quite yet, he hoped there'd be somebody like me around. It's whatever, and he knew my parents, and they were such fine people. UPS sent a reporter up to the district to cover the campaign because it was kind of marked by compliments rather than by attacks. Very much different than campaigns are now. When I was elected and sworn in on, I think, the 4th of January, 1965, Walt came on the floor and took me in to the Democratic and the Republican cloakrooms and introduced me as his successor. That was unheard of for anybody except somebody in the same party. And the interesting thing to me was I got, in some ways, better received in the Republican cloakroom than in the Democratic cloakroom. I think the Republicans, this is the kind of thing that happens in politics, you lose. And Walt was very gracious in taking me in and introducing me to his former colleagues. But where I got a stiff reaction was in the Democratic cloakroom. John Rooney, who had been a seatmate for Walt Rand on the Appropriations Committee, was sitting there, and Walt came up, and I overheard him say this. He leaned down and he says, "John, it's all right." But it was never all right with Mr. Rooney. As long as I served with him.
He was a pretty crusty guy.
He was a crusty guy. And he was absolutely cold as ice with me because Walt had been his friend and he was just unforgiving that I had won the election. We also got a reception for Walt that afternoon, and Eddie Hebert from Louisiana came in and said, "What's going on here? What is going on here? I hate my opponent before, during, and after the election."
That's right.
But I hope it's not a completely disappearing phenomenon, that people can have respect and friendship across the
Well,
aisle.
we've gone from Tom Foley, House Majority Leader, to Tom DeLay, and to personalize the shift in what's going on back there in the Congress. How do you counter that? This absence of your kind of moderation.
Yeah, I think a couple
hands
of things
across
have
the aisle.
happened. One is that the majority is close, and so that kind of requires tough discipline on both sides. You don't have neither the present speaker nor the present Democratic leader can afford to lose too many people, and so there's a sort of tough party discipline. And then, unfortunately, members don't get to know each other very much anymore. They come in, even more than they used to, at the beginning of the week on Tuesday, and they leave on Thursday, and they have a lot of crowded votes on Tuesday and Wednesday, and maybe Thursday morning, Tuesday afternoon, and Wednesday and Thursday morning. And then they leave and go back home, wherever home is. In other days, and we still had, when I first came to Congress, members who wouldn't fly and who went home by train or drove. And, you know, so that meant that they stayed in Washington a lot longer than, and where some people might think that that's a bad idea, it really created an opportunity for people to get to know each other.
Did Tom Kelly set an example?
Yeah,
for
Tom Kelly, that's
he
right.
He always rode the
He
train.
always rode the train.
It
It was a Great Northern, whatever it was. It took 4 days and 3 nights, or 3 days and 3 nights to get out to Seattle. But as a result of not really getting acquainted, in the old days, that is going back to the 60s and 70s, members used to, across party lines, would live in the same neighborhoods, children would go to the same schools, they would wind up attending the same parties, and there was an acquaintance and often a friendship that made the political work in the Congress much easier and less bitter and hostile. Then when you compound this with the hard redistricting, where incumbents have been protected in a lot of states, both Democrats and Republicans, it creates an alienation and a hostility and a tension that's really unhealthy, I think.
Then you throw in a personality difference also, Tom, to be, not to flatter you too much, but between you and Tom DeLay, there's an enormous difference of personality and approach. I always thought you saw 3 sides to every argument rather than, and DeLay strikes me as a kind of leader who sees only one.
Yeah. Well, that, by the way, claiming I saw 3 sides to every issue, every argument, was Tip O'Neill's comment, as you know, and he didn't really mean it as a tremendous compliment. It was more a criticism than a compliment. You know, Tip was a great friend of mine and a great patron of mine, along with Scoop. He was probably the person that had more to do with my opportunities to serve in the House, and Tip always was a little impatient with the fact that I was always kind of saying, well, on the other hand, and on the other hand, and so forth.